Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It's Brian here, back in my garage with another snowblower. Today, this is an Ariens 8526. This is my father-in-law's snowblower. This thing is a beast. But you know what? It's a pain in the neck when we have a heavy snowfall up here in New England. And when I go to try to start this thing and I'm pulling the cord, and it just won't start until I pull it probably about 20, 25 times. Absolutely drives me crazy. But the funny thing is it has a starter on it, but same problem as I had with my Troy bolt. I'll put a link to that video up in the corner here. I plug it in, I push the button, nothing. So I went ahead and ordered a replacement starter for this snowblower, and I'm going to walk through the process of replacing this starter like I did for my other snowblower. I'm not very mechanical, so if I can do this, you can do it too. Let's get into it. So to start out with, a few tools that we're going to need will be a Phillips head screwdriver and also a T30 Torx or Starbit screwdriver. You may also want to use an adjustable crescent wrench in the event that the Torx screwdriver is not able to get the screws undone easily on the starter itself. So the first thing we're going to do is remove these two Phillips head screws with our Phillips head screwdriver from the plug box. Okay, just like the other video I did, these screws are relatively long, so make sure to set them aside and not lose them. I'll go ahead and remove the other one, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so we now have our two Phillips head screws removed. Now our plug box assembly is free and loose to remove. So now we can freely remove the plug box assembly and just tuck it back off to the side here. So if we look at this from a different angle, this is the plug box assembly that we just removed. And you'll notice that the cord is attached to the starter down below. Now on this snowblower, the starter is located directly underneath the fuel tank. You'll notice that you have two screws here. And as I mentioned, you can either use a T30 Torx screwdriver, or you can use a crescent wrench if they're really frozen in there tight. So in my case, I'm going to attempt to use my T30 Torx screwdriver to remove these screws. They're actually fairly loose on this side. And you want to hold the starter a little bit so it doesn't just fall out of position here. And make sure not to lose this screw. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. This one's definitely a little bit tighter. There we go. Now it's loosened up. Again, screws out. Save it. And now we're just going to, with both hands, carefully take the assembly and kind of jiggle it and pull it out. And you'll see here that the starter is now removed from the snowblower. So I definitely don't know much about starters and anything about this for that matter, but I can tell by looking at this that this gear has two broken fins, I guess I'll call them. If I spin this around, you can see, oh, there's another one right there. So I have a feeling that even if this did have actual power going to it, it would be failing at some point because there's at least 3 broken teeth on this. And the job of these teeth is to grab the teeth on the engine itself to start the snowblower. So there would definitely be some slippage going on. So for now, though, I'm just going to go ahead and set this starter aside. And before I do the new one, what I'll tell you is that this is the Tecumseh engine on this snowblower. And so when I ordered the new starter, I made sure to look up the model of this particular snowblower. I was able to determine the engine that was in it, and then I was able to determine the specific starter to get. I will provide a link to that in the description of this video as well. Okay, here we go. Here is the new starter, the replacement. And I want to point out on the top of this, you'll notice these two little kind of keyed slots here. These slots are going to slide in underneath two screws that are at the top mounting point for the new starter. And I'll show you a close-up of what those look like now. Okay, so if you look up here, you'll notice that there is a screw here, and there's a screw over here. And there's a gap underneath each of them. And so what you're going to do is take those little fins on the top of the new starter and slide them underneath that gap. So before we put the new starter in, we want to take a look at the teeth on the gear of the engine itself. So what we're going to do is just carefully pull slowly the pull cord and just rotate it through and take a look at all the teeth that we have and make sure that there's no obvious missing teeth, because that also will cause a skipping problem. So far I definitely just see some rust. I don't see any actual broken teeth. So I feel pretty confident that we can go ahead and install the new starter and then give it a whirl. So here's a side-by-side shot of the two starters. The bad starter is on the left. The new starter replacement is on the right. I'm noticing that the very top of the new starter appears to be longer and skinnier than the one on the left. So I'm curious as to whether this is going to fit or not. Here is an alternate shot of the same. Notice the tip of this one is rounded. This one's flattened off. So these angles are kind of difficult to get good camera shots with good lighting. So basically what I did was I inserted the tip of the starter into where the engine and the gear in there is. That slid in pretty easily. Now, like I mentioned, up top here, you have those two screws with the gaps underneath the heads. And you're basically going to, see if I can get this or not, slide up underneath. Yeah, I can't really get it good on camera here, but those little fins that were on the top of the starter have slid underneath the gaps of those screws up top. So now all we need to do is attach the two bottom screws that we removed earlier. So now that those are in the slots on the top, we're basically just going to put the screws back in on the bottom using our T30 Torx screwdriver or a crescent wrench. So I'll go ahead and put those in now. I'll just put it in loosely. Do the same on the other side. Okay, that one's tightened. That one's tightened as well. So to finish off, what we're going to do is then pull up the cable with the power assembly. And we're going to reattach with the Phillips head screws that we removed earlier. Now, what I will say is the starter that I purchased did come with its own hardware. I've read lots of reviews on some of them that they don't provide hardware, but I am using the screws that came with this new assembly for here. I also swapped out the screws that I used to mount the starter itself with the actual hardware provided with the new starter. And again, these screws are pretty long, so it's going to take quite a few turns to get it in. But once they're in, just give them a nice little snug twist. And now we're ready to test out the new starter. Okay, so much like I did in the last video, I'm going to remove the key so that it doesn't actually start quite yet. I just want to make sure that it's attempting to turn over. And then I'm going to plug in the plug into our new starter plug assembly, like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and push the button. So it definitely sounds like it's trying to start. So let's throw some gas in and see how we make out. I'll also point out a tool that I have come to, or I should say accessory that I've come to love, is this fluid pump. I'll post a link for this in the description as well. But you basically just insert the end of it, which is like a wand, into your fuel jug, and then you attach the other end to your destination tank. You turn the switch on, and it just starts to pump fuel into your other machine's tank. So I'm only going to do a little bit of gas here because it's going to still be a while, hopefully, before we get snowfall. But I want to have enough to be able to test this out. So I've gone ahead and shut that off. I'm just going to get any excess gas out here. And then we're going to prime it and start it up. Okay, so I've got it choked. I've got the throttle turned all the way up. I got the key back in. So I'm going to go ahead and prime it. What I'll say is I'm pumping this, but I don't hear any gas actually coming into the bowl. All I hear is air. There is actually, I believe, a fuel shutoff valve here. So if I go ahead and open that up, now I can probably prime it again and actually get fuel into the bowl. There we go. Give it about 4 or 5 pumps just because this is the first time I've put fuel in it all season, and then I'll go ahead and give it a start. There you go, baby. It's a beautiful thing. So hopefully, as you saw in the video, for the non-mechanically inclined like myself, this was a very easy and straightforward repair. I would say all totaled, without having to set up the camera and whatnot, it probably took me about 15 minutes from start to finish. As I mentioned in the video, the new starter was slightly different shape than the original starter, and it came with its own hardware. I did run into some issues trying to remount the new starter with the old starter's hardware. So I ended up using the screws in the bottom that came with the new starter, and I also used the screws that came with the new starter up in the plug box assembly as well. I hope you found this content useful, and New England, winter's coming. I hope you have a happy snowblowing season. Have a great day. See ya.
Rossi Bites.